Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I thought I'd do a little track breakdown of a piece of music that I wrote a little while ago now. It's called Classical Gasoline. It was for a production music album which featured a live string orchestra. The album was very much aimed at sports promos and just general situations where you want something very exciting, very dramatic, and a little bit classical sounding, you know, so I'm playing around with things that maybe sound a bit like from the world of Baroque or classical music, but giving them a very modern, slightly more trailerish feeling, a bit more contemporary in some of the production. And so, yeah, this track in particular, I think for me was just one of the highlights of the album. I really enjoyed working on it. It was really fun to record. I think it came out pretty close to what I was imagining in my mind. The track was licensed for a BBC show kind of recently, and they used quite a good long chunk of the track. And it was just really nice to see it come full circle when we'd been kind of visualizing that kind of usage, and then to have a producer pick up the track and use it in that context. It was really cool. So I wanted to share that and just share this as an example of how I personally approach writing this kind of TV music. Let's have a look at the usage of the track so we can hear the music in context. Then I'll play through the track just in its entirety so you can hear it uninterrupted with no sound design or anything like that. Then I'll go through some of the individual tracks and just show you a bit about the nuts and bolts of the different layers and how they're working together and some of the production processes. I'll talk a bit about how I used string samples as well as how I used the live string orchestra that we recorded. What things are split out and done as layers, which things we recorded together, etc. And I might also talk a little bit more generally about the compositional approach and the harmony. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this is the show. It's called Slammed the 80s, and it's all about Welsh rugby. And this is right at the top of the show.
When we came back from the World Cup, people felt it was a success. We went into it under huge pressure, but when we arrived, we played some really good rugby.
On John Devonor. Lovely dummy to Hadley. Jonathan Davies, the second drop goal.
Oh, what a try this is going to be for Glenn Webb.
Wales are through to the semi-finals of the World Cup and now play New Zealand.
A semi-final, it was more than we were expecting. New Zealand, it was a bad
They've added
day in
a
the
few
office.
sub-booms there to go with the action.
Despite the heavy loss, there was a realisation that we could end up third in the World Cup.
This challenge for the third place in the world. Cleverer in the middle. What a handoff.
We've got this one opportunity.
So we go on to the next energy level of the track.
He has done it.
That game had given us so much confidence. If we keep this group together, it's going to take a really good side to beat us.
So when we came back, thought, oh, we done third, that's fine. Get off the bus and back home. Get a job, get into the work next day.
All the talk when they came home was, would Jonathan Davies and John Devereux be going to rugby league?
So you didn't know anything about these reports or offers from rugby league clubs?
No. Everyone would say, you're ready-made for rugby league.
Since I left college, I'm looking for a job.
The World Cup put people
Music
on
really
worse
driving
stage.
everything forward.
He's got lots of support. This is Devereux.
Having seen the likes of Jonathan, John Dev perform so well, this was an opportunity again for rugby league to raid the valleys and to take the best of what we had.
So there we go. So yeah, they pretty much used the entire track, albeit in a slightly truncated form. They really hung the narrative onto the musical structure that I built into the track, which is exactly what I was hoping for. It really felt like the music and the action were kind of working hand in hand. I'll just play you the track now from start to finish so you can hear it uninterrupted. So you've got this subtle pad at the top here. We have our solo string part here. And our live strings down here, the live ensemble strings. We recorded that at Angel Studios. We still have some sampled strings in here, as well as this synth bass. So here's the live strings by themselves. We recorded them as 2 layers. So that gave us the ability to create an underscore version. But it's mostly being carried by the live. There's just a few samples in there to support it. Some piano piano. Some simple percussion layers up here. Got this nice epic solo string part. And then my decision to just leave it unresolved there harmonically at the end rather than coming crashing down on the tonic chord. Yeah, just leaving it totally hanging there in the air. So yeah, my favourite part of all of this is of course the live strings. And I've done literally nothing to this stem. This is just how it came. This is just how it sounded. Bounced out of the Pro Tools session. It had been given a nice mix at the session. The microphones were all balanced. You know, a little bit of judicious processing applied, but nothing too crazy. So this is how I opted to work after the string session, when it was time to kind of bring the strings into my project and kind of just tweak things and finalize the rest of the arrangement. I decided to work with just this mixed down string stem rather than bringing in all the different microphone positions and playing around with the colors too much myself. I just used the bounce down string stem as my kind of jumping off point that I would then make everything else kind of fit with that. So we have this kind of bed of strings, and then on top of that we've got the top line. Those kinds of lines are just so rich compared to anything that you could do with a sample library. Just really hearing all of that noise and grit and the sort of emotion from behind the instrument there, really cool. So yeah, those are the things that are kind of carrying the track really, and then I've just got the sample strings supporting them a little bit. So that's with, that's without, that's with, without. And then also I do have a sample part that's adding new material in this case, and that's the bass. By doing the bass with the sample, it allowed me to make the bass super tight and punchy without there being loads of bass in the room when we were recording the other instruments. It just gave me that extra bit of flexibility when it came to mixing. So the bass part is just a sample in this part of the track. And then here it combines with the basses that we recorded and just adds a little bit of extra emphasis. It's just adding a little bit of extra hyper-real dimension. And then we have some more sample strings over here. Again, all of this is there in the live strings, but by having a sample in there, it just, for me, it just gives it a little bit of extra sweetness. Without. So because these CSS strings have a really nice rounded, quite dark tone, I feel like they're complementing the live strings really well. We recorded 30 players, so and also it wasn't a huge space, so it does have quite a crisp, dry, quite light sound overall in the live strings, and so just having that slightly lusher, slightly fatter sound in the samples, I think just helps to balance out the colours a bit. I also, at points, was using the solo recorded violin to kind of give it a little bit of extra grit and bite. You can hear it there at the start quite clearly. Of course, this is my working mix. I should mention that these will have been slightly rebalanced at the mixing stage, but you get the idea. I guess now I'll just go from top to bottom a little bit and talk about some of the other sounds. So we've got this pad thing, which is being pitch shifted. It sounds quite dodgy on its own, but with the other stuff going on, I think it sounds cool. So I'm using this pitch funk plugin and just automating the pitch there. And it's a Flortando patch from Spitfire Chamber Strings. And it's also going through a decapitator, which is a distortion. It almost ends up sounding more like a synth, but I quite like using organic samples like string samples, pushing them through effects until they sound more like a synth. I find that often brings me to quite an interesting area sonically, where you have this combination of something that's a bit more unpredictable and real, but also something that's clearly processed and synthetic. Perhaps more so than if you just started with a synthetic sound. Let's have a listen to some of the percussion on its own. So we have this layer, which I believe is the Moog, using the white noise channel on there and the filter, and playing with the release times until I got a nice kind of shape to the sound, and then just playing it quite percussively. In context, it sounds like this. I like designing simple sounds like that from scratch rather than trying to dive into a sample library. This is quite an interesting sound. So these low-end sort of swoops there are just volume automations. I had that assigned to a fader, and I would just ride the fader up and down according to what I heard in my mind's ear. And this sample, without the automation, just sounds like this. That's just quite a handy sample I like to have knocking around. I have it over here in this untagged bit. It's just one of my go-to little samples that's just useful in so many situations because it just acts as source material. Then I can shape it, and it just creates these nice, interesting moments. Let's hear it in context. It's kind of similar to doing a roll on a low drum, like a timpani or something, but it's more abstract, it's more sound designy, I guess, and it's cleaner, it's more focused. Like, all I wanted was a low-end push, so all I'm putting in is a low-end push with very little information other than the fact that it's just a low-end rumble. Again, I kind of like very simple sound design elements like that. So this white noise thing was, again, just using my Moog over here and playing with the filter. We got Epic Toms, which I think are by Cinesamples. It's quite an old patch. We have some sub-hits, which I believe are by Keep Forest. Again, very simple. I've got another Epic Toms here, the Cinesamples one, but filtered way up top. So together they sound like this. And in context they sound like this. In this later section I have a very subtle Col Legno patch layered in, which almost sounds like ticking. We didn't bother recording this live in the end because I think the sample does a really good job. And we didn't want to record too many different layers with the live ensemble, partly due to union rules and stuff like that. Again, very subtle. But fits with the vibe nicely. Here's a cool thing. As part of this riser at the end, I've got a fairly generic string rise, I think probably from Cage by 8DO, sounds like this. Then I've doubled it, but I've used Alter Boy to pitch it down an octave and then driving it really hard, and on its own that sounds like this. And I'm automating up the volume. Sounds really gnarly, and then together. And then in context. I feel like a lot of these things that I'm showing you are on the subtle side. So, you know, oftentimes the more kind of fun processes are actually, you know, relatively small and relatively unimportant things in the grand scheme of things. I guess the most important thing compositionally that isn't just sort of frosting and ear candy and stuff is really the structure of the piece harmonically and melodically. So I guess I could talk a little bit about how I thought about it from that point of view. So most of the piece is basically around D. And it's kind of like you have this very stable, very static D pedal tone throughout the whole thing, almost. And then you're just adding like tension notes against the D and different little melodic fragments against the D. So you know, it's all that kind of idea as the general concept. So just using a kind of stable bass note and then playing almost anything and using your ear to notice what feels tense, what feels natural. So kind of thing. So what have we got at the start? So we have this. So that's another thing is throughout this piece, although I'm thinking of it largely in D minor, it's actually, I don't use the minor third that much. I've generally left it quite open. So that opening riff is just fifth. It's just D and A, open fifth, so no minor third. So it's not, instead it's, which gives it, I don't know, gives it a much more open-ended feel. I feel like it creates more space for whatever drama it's supporting. It doesn't feel quite as conclusive. It feels a bit more open-ended. It feels a bit more like intriguing what's going to happen next. So if you listen to the solo string part at the beginning on its own, we have this kind of line happening. Dun, dun, dun. So it's what I was saying before. It's just playing, you're starting home on the D, then you're kind of just drifting away. This time we are hearing the minor third, but it's kind of buried in the texture, so it doesn't feel like a very strong presence of the minor third, and there's other things going on. And it does change the chord slightly there. So that's implying, again, it feels very open. In D minor, you might expect to hear, but this C natural in the context of D feels again quite ambiguous. Essentially, it's kind of a A minor over D as a tension against the D. So everything is just a tension against the D. That's how I'm thinking about it. Little fun fact about this particular recording is that we ended up, in order to get the sound that I was after, we ended up actually recording it at a slower tempo and then speeding it up in post-production, just so that the kind of approach between the notes, the sort of in between the notes, felt right. This was partly a time constraint because it's quite a fiddly and tricky thing to execute completely cleanly, but also when playing fast, there was a tendency for it to sound a bit more choppy. And I also added a nice little delay in there, which complexifies the sound a bit. So yeah, it sounds really intense. It's definitely a playable line. It's just the sort of thing that probably if I were to record this in a concert or in a live context, I would probably send the music beforehand. In this case, we were just kind of working within stricter time constraints. Let's talk about this main riff. So again, just another really simple melodic fragment, just a downward da 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 da. So they're all about this top line. And just this D continuing all the way through. So again, this was a decision that had to do with the fact that it was media music, the fact that I wanted a piece that was constructed in such a way that you could jump cut between different sections of the piece that had different levels of emotional intensity and that it wouldn't feel out of place. So in a lot of ways, this piece, although it's a classical piece or a kind of orchestral piece, is structurally almost more like a piece of dance music or a piece of electronic music, which has a very consistent just kind of pulse and a very harmonically stable bed. But a lot of variation within that and a lot of playing with small fragments of melodic material. And also a lot of Baroque music is formed of these kind of almost quite generic little patterns like, you know, or, you know, little pieces of music that are almost so generic or so pattern-based that they don't have a lot of personality on their own, and hence they don't sort of clutter the music with a lot of like emotional resonance in a way. They're just little Legos. I guess that was something that I was interested in exploring with this album in general, is kind of tapping into that more Baroque mindset, which just gives the album a particular kind of vibe. So far we've been listening to this section, which is all over D. Then here, right about in the middle, we have this contrasting section where we do actually go on a bit more of a journey harmonically. And nothing particularly fruity going on here. It's literally just using some diatonic chords. Again, thinking very much about the lines being described. So in the top and then in the bottom, so you have that kind of thing. D minor, going to the 4 chord, the G minor, and then going to a D minor but in first inversion, and you get this nice sweet harmony between the outer voices. And then again, keeping the stepwise motion in the bass, you have this inversion of a A7, which is the dominant chord. So it's a very sort of traditional way of spelling out the harmony there. You know, just the chord choices are very conventionalized. But you just have this bit more of a sense of traveling in this middle section. Before the last section hits, and we're back to this really stable, consistent D pedal tone, you might call it. And actually, we're now getting a little spicier harmonically. So this A flat here gives us a tritone. It's a flat 5 or a tritone sharp 4. So essentially, that's one of the most sort of aggressive note choices you could have. And it's the first time we've heard this note so far in the piece as well. One of the things I often think about is how to make the music feel like it's unfolding and developing and growing out of itself. And so that means getting the right combination, the right balance between repetition and kind of callbacks to earlier material versus adding in little new moments and little sort of surprises, basically. So we get this whole section, and then we have essentially a repetition in the next section starting here, but with an additional layer. With this violin. So that idea of just stacking and stacking, that's just a very classic trailer music, promo music technique. Again, it just makes it really easy for editors to just chop into the right level of emotional intensity. This string line, I don't know if you noticed, is describing the same melody as the piano from earlier on in the track. So I'm, again, just building off of what's already there. That ba 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 becomes a little bit tweaked. And just a really great performance here from Anna de Bruin. Shoved it through some Echo Boy and some Valhalla reverb there. Yeah, we spent quite a long time getting the feel of that take right. I just really love combining the sound of virtuosic solo strings with like the weight and the body of a full string orchestra. It's just a really fun compositional approach. Just going back once more to the harmonic language, one of the things that happens at the end of each of these sections is, again, kind of like the A flat from earlier, the use of a C sharp. So you're getting this. Which is, you know, obviously quite a clash. And it's in the context of that walk up. So it doesn't feel out of place because of the way that it's preceded by this upward line. It feels very natural. But if you were to get that kind of out of the blue, it would feel very jarring. But it is creating a very jarring moment of tension. It's maximizing the tension there before it resolves and repeats the phrase. And then we just have an extra big special rise at the end of the track. Let's just listen to the strings on their own, the live strings on their own, just for that last section, because I think it's just so fantastic how rough they sound, how raw they sound. Ugh. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So the sounds that you haven't heard yet, the bass, which is just a bass from Trillion. I played with the filter cut off. It's the big and clicky preset, which I use a lot with a few tweaks. There were some timps, which are from Spitfire Percussion, just really simple timp part. There were these little kind of additional high string elements, which I panned. And those samples are actually based on real recordings, so I didn't feel the need to re-record those in the session. I wanted it to be a little bit kind of artificial anyway. This track is kind of a hybrid approach to productions. You know, I would never do something like that in a more classical context, that kind of panning, or that kind of way of, you know, it's quite filtered here. I've cut a lot of the top end off. You know, in general, I wanted to play around with the sort of things like dimension, things like how bright it is or how washed out the sound is. You know, you have this really generous echo and reverb and delay on the solo strings. Everything's very sort of shaped and processed in a way that is kind of helping it serve its musical purpose even more than it would be if it was just recorded in a more natural, organic kind of way. So I wanted to find ways to take full advantage of those kinds of micromanaging processing decisions in order to serve the emotionality of the track, basically. So there you have it. I hope you found a little nugget in there somewhere to aid you in your composing journey. Let me know if you have any particular questions about processes or anything that you're hearing that you're not quite sure what it is, or just anything general about composing and writing for libraries. There is another video that I wrote which goes a bit more in depth about the process of recording this album, and I'll put a link to that at the end of this video and also in the description. So yeah, if you're interested, check that out. Thank you very much for your attention. See you on the next video. Take care.